Sometimes, a song isn't just a song. It's a lifeline, a promise, a cry for help that no one expects will be answered, especially not by a stranger with his own unfinished melody. This is the story of a poor boy with a voice too powerful to ignore, and the single father who unknowingly held the missing chord. What happened on that broken stage would change 3 lives forever, and just might change yours too. If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more moments that remind us all, love, kindness, and second chances still exist. Now let me tell you what really happened when a boy sang to save his mother, and the world held its breath. Raylan Quinn had driven this road 1,000 times, but never once had it made his knuckles go white. Tonight was different. The snow came in sideways, slicing through the beam of his headlights like tiny knives. The world outside his truck was silent, save for the occasional crunch of slush beneath his tires. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield wipers as they worked furiously against the storm. His shift at the school auditorium had run late again. The old wiring had shorted, and 2 microphones had blown right before the regional talent show scheduled for Saturday. Raylan had offered to stay and fix it. He always did. No one ever asked, but no one else ever volunteered either. He turned onto the final stretch of County Road 16, just half a mile from his tiny rented house, when something jolted in his periphery. A flash of red, something small. A shape. He braked hard. The truck fishtailed slightly before skidding to a halt. For a moment, nothing moved. Then he saw it. A child. Raylan's heart shot into his throat as he threw open the door and leapt into the storm. Snow crunched under his boots as he ran, boots slipping slightly with each step. The boy, no more than 10 or 11, was lying curled up near the roadside ditch, barely distinguishable from the mounds of snow. Hey, Kid Raylan dropped to his knees, brushing snow from the boy's face. His skin was ice cold, lips tinged blue, arms wrapped around a soaked envelope clutched to his chest. Raylan didn't think he just moved. He scooped the boy into his arms and ran back to the truck. The child was frighteningly light, his breath, shallow eyelids fluttering. Raylan turned the heat up, full blast, and wrapped his own jacket around the boy's shoulders. He dialed 911 with one hand, keeping his eyes on the kid. He's freezing somewhere on County Road 16 close to McKay's Bridge, he barked into the phone. Looks about 11, unconscious and await. The boy stirred. His eyes fluttered open only halfway. He blinked up at Raylan, dazed and barely coherent. His lips trembled before he spoke, hoarse, barely audible. Please, help my mom. Raylan swallowed hard, holding the boy closer. What's your name, son? Benji. The name hit Raylan in the chest like a name you hadn't heard in years, but somehow already loved. And your mom? Where is she? Benji didn't answer. He passed out in Raylan's arms. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old tile. Raylan sat stiffly in the waiting room, still wearing his snow-wet clothes, arms crossed, mind racing. Who was this boy? Why was he out in the snow alone? Where was his family? A nurse finally appeared. He's stable. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, but he'll be okay. Raylan exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath for an hour. He had this with him. She handed over the soggy envelope Benji had been clutching. On the front, written in crooked pencil letters, Talent Show, for Mom. Raylan opened it carefully. Inside were the registration forms for the Pennsylvania State Talent Show, some sheet music, and a handwritten note in a child's scrawl. If I win, we can fix her heart. Please let me sing. Raylan's hands trembled slightly as he set the envelope down. His chest tightened, not just with sorrow, but with something else. Recognition. Benji awoke hours later. Raylan was still there. You're the man who found me, Benji said quietly. Raylan nodded. Yeah, I'm Raylan. Benji stared at him with wide, clear eyes that looked far too old for a child. Are you a doctor? Raylan chuckled softly. No, I just fix broken microphones. Benji's lips twitched. Do you fix broken voices? Raylan looked at him, really looked into that strange, bright, bruised soul. I might, he said. Back in the hospital room, Benji talked about his mom who used to teach music but couldn't work anymore, about the old RV they lived in behind the abandoned church, about how he'd heard about the talent show at school and that the winner got $25,000. She doesn't know I entered, Benji said. I wanted it to be a surprise, so she could get her surgery. Raylan blinked away something behind his eyes. You're going to need someone to help you get ready, he said. Benji looked up. You think I can win? I don't know, Raylan said honestly. But I think, if the world hears what I heard in that truck, they won't forget it. That night, after Benji fell asleep, Raylan sat alone in the hospital's chapel. Dim light filtered through colored glass. The silence was thick. He hadn't touched a piano in over a decade, not since she left. And now, somehow, a boy with a broken voice and a crumpled envelope had cracked something open in him. Raylan bowed his head, not in prayer, but in surrender. Maybe it was time. Time to play again. Time to believe. The next morning brought the kind of soft sunlight that made hospital windows look warmer than they were. Raylan stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed, eyes on the boy still asleep in the narrow bed. Benji's chest rose and fell steadily now, color returning to his cheeks. He looked peaceful. Too peaceful for a child who had spent the night before nearly freezing to death, with nothing but a crumpled envelope and a whispered plea for help. A nurse entered quietly. His mother's in room 209, she said. Came in early this morning after she found the note he left. Mild arrhythmia and exhaustion. We're running tests. Raylan's brow furrowed. Can I see her? She's awake. You might want to take this. She handed him a folded piece of paper. Benji had written it in all caps. Don't be mad. I had to try. Love you, Mom. Raylan swallowed hard. He looked back at Benji, and then followed the nurse down the hallway. Room 209 smelled like old sheets and cleaning solution. The woman in the bed was younger than he'd expected, maybe late 30s, early 40s. She had a strength in her face that wasn't erased by fatigue. Her auburn hair, though messy, framed her face with dignity. She looked up when he entered. You're the man who found him, she said. Raylan nodded, stepping closer. Raylan Quinn. Carly Wallace. They shook hands. Her grip was firm but trembling. I thought I lost him, she whispered, eyes glistening. When I woke up and saw the envelope gone, the RV door cracked open, my whole body just shut down. He's safe now, Raylan said gently. He's a brave kid. Carly gave a dry laugh. He's a stubborn dreamer, always has been, since his dad left. There it was, the silent ache behind her eyes. He told me about the contest, Raylan said. Her lips thinned. I told him no. I didn't want him to get hurt. He thinks he can save me. With a song. Raylan lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. Maybe he can. She blinked. You really think a song can save a life? I think the right voice at the right moment can move mountains, he replied. There was a pause. Then she asked, Are you a teacher? Raylan hesitated. Not anymore. She nodded slowly, as if that answer made sense in ways he hadn't intended. That afternoon back in Benji's room, the boy was awake and sipping juice from a plastic cup when Raylan walked in. His face lit up. Hey, Benji said with a grin. I thought you'd be gone. Raylan raised an eyebrow. Why would I be gone? Benji shrugged. People usually leave. Raylan pulled a chair up beside the bed. Well, I don't usually do what people do. Benji's eyes sparkled. Mom said I was in trouble. You scared her, kid. I had to try, he said, suddenly serious. She's all I have. I thought if I won, she could stop crying at night. Raylan leaned forward, elbows on knees. And what if you didn't win? Benji looked at him for a long moment. Then, at least I tried. Raylan nodded slowly. Okay then, let's try. Benji blinked. You mean, you'll help me? I'll do more than that, Raylan said. I'll get you ready. They started small, simple breathing exercises, warm-ups, and posture. Raylan borrowed an old keyboard from the school and set it up beside Benji's bed. The nurses gave them funny looks at first, but eventually they just smiled and kept walking. Benji's voice had a raw, unfiltered quality. Not perfect, but honest. And when he sang, it wasn't just melody, it was truth. The kind that came from someone who had seen too much for their age, but still believed in hope. Raylan hadn't felt this kind of fire in years. Not since he and Melina had stood on stage in Nashville, chasing a dream that crumbled before the last note faded. One afternoon, a nurse poked her head in and said, "You two planning a world tour?" Benji grinned. Only if he plays backup. Raylan smirked. Kid's got a diva streak. But something else stirred in Raylan's chest. Pride. Purpose. And an ache he hadn't named in years. Later that evening, as Raylan was packing up, Carly appeared at the door. Her face looked softer somehow. She held a thermos of coffee, offering it with a nod. "You've made him different," she said. Raylan took the cup, unsure how to respond. He was fading, she continued. Before this. Before you. Raylan looked down. He brought me back too, you know. Carly tilted her head. From what he thought about it. The years of silence. The pianos left untouched. The photos hidden in drawers. From forgetting who I was. There was a silence between them. Not awkward, but honest. She didn't press him. She just stood there with the kind of quiet that makes you want to stay longer. That night, Raylan didn't go straight home. He parked by the old church, looked up at the stars, and opened the glove compartment. Inside was a photograph, faded at the edges of him, and Melina, arms around each other, faces flushed from performing years ago. He hadn't looked at it in over a decade. He touched the corner with one calloused finger. Maybe he whispered, "It's time to believe again." The hospital chapel was almost always empty by evening, save for the occasional visitor who came to light a candle or sit in silence. That night, Raylan found himself there again, though not to pray. He wasn't sure he remembered how. The room was still. A single stained glass window caught the moonlight, casting shades of blue and amber across the old piano tucked in the corner. It hadn't been played in years. Dust coated the lid, but Raylan's fingers itched. He sat down. At first he didn't touch the keys, just sat there, staring at them like old friends he hadn't called in too long. Then gently he pressed one. Then another. The chords came slowly, almost cautiously, like testing if music still lived inside him. It did. And it hurt. The next morning, Benji was already waiting when Raylan entered his hospital room. The keyboard was on the stand. Adjusted, the boy sitting straight-backed like a tiny professional. "You're early," Raylan said. "You said early bird gets the note," Benji replied with a smirk. Raylan chuckled. "I said early bird gets the chords." But close enough. They began their usual routine scales, breathing control. But today something shifted. Raylan brought out a printed sheet of lyrics. Ever heard of Bridge Over Troubled Water? Benji scanned the page. Simon and Garfunkel. Raylan nodded. It's an old song, before your time, but it carries something deep, something you can't fake. Benji looked up. "You think I can sing this?" Raylan paused. "I think this song is already inside you." The boy was quiet-eyes on the lyrics. Then softly he began to sing. The first few notes were shaky, then stronger and stronger. until the room filled with something so achingly raw and beautiful that even the nurse who came in with Benji's chart stopped in the doorway and forgot why she came. Raylan said nothing. He just played simple, deliberate chords, letting the song carry itself. By the time Benji reached the line, "I will lay me down," there wasn't a sound in the room, but the boy's voice and Raylan's steady piano beneath it like a heartbeat. Afterward, they sat in silence. "You didn't look at me once while I sang," Benji said. Raylan smiled. "Didn't have to." Benji hesitated, then asked, "Was I?" "Good." Raylan turned to him. "You weren't good, Benji. You were honest. That matters more." The boy beamed, but Raylan could still see the doubt flicker in his eyes, the fear of not being enough. It was a fear Raylan knew intimately. He saw it in the mirror for years. Later that day, Raylan found himself driving to the school auditorium. The lights were off. The doors were locked. But he had a key. He let himself in and walked the length of the stage, empty chairs staring back like quiet witnesses. He sat at the grand piano center stage, ran his fingers across the polished keys, and began to play the same song Benji had sung. As he did, memory swelled. He saw himself at 23, standing beside Melina under bright lights, their hands clasped before the final chorus. Her voice soared. His chords carried her. They had been unstoppable. Until they weren't. It had been 11 years. He hadn't seen Melina since the night she walked out with swollen eyes, a shaking voice, and a decision he hadn't been brave enough to challenge. She was pregnant. He had begged her to stay, promised they'd figure it out. But the grief over a failed audition, a lost deal, the crushing weight of unmet expectations, it all collapsed between them like rotted wood. And just like that, she was gone. And so was the child. He had never known what happened to them. Raylan looked down at his hands. They trembled now. Not from age, but from the realization clawing its way to the surface. Benji. The eyes. The timing. The way his voice echoed something that lived in Raylan's blood. Could it be he closed the piano softly and sat in the stillness? He didn't let himself believe yet. Not fully. But something was changing. Inside him. Around him. The following day, Carly sat beside Benji while he practiced. Raylan watched from the hallway hidden behind the doorframe, not wanting to intrude on the tender exchange. Mom Benji said, "Do you think I have a chance?" Carly smiled. "I think if love had a sound, it would sound like you." Benji laughed. "That's cheesy." "It's also true," she replied. Raylan smiled to himself. She had a calmness about her now, like someone who had learned to live with less and love with more. When she stood to leave, Raylan stepped out to let her pass. She paused, coffee in hand. "He's different since you came," she said. "I think he always had it in him," Raylan replied. Carly studied him for a moment. "And you? Are you finding your music again?" Raylan hesitated, then nodded. Slowly. Carly softened. Sometimes slowly is the only way it stays. That evening, Benji asked to practice the song again. Raylan played slower this time, more deliberate. Benji's voice was surer, and with each note, Raylan felt a tether tighten between them. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a confession, a reunion neither of them had yet acknowledged. Raylan ended the song with a quiet chord held it, then let it fade. Benji turned to him. "You play like someone who lost something." Raylan looked at the boy. "I think I'm starting to find it again." There was a time when Raylan Quinn believed music could fix anything. He believed it the way a child believes in magic, that as long as the melody was strong enough, the harmony true enough, it could hold the broken parts of life together. It had once held him together, too. But music has a way of betraying those who lean on it too hard. That betrayal came the night Melina walked away. He hadn't picked up an instrument since. Not until Benji. Raylan sat in his garage that night, alone, with a worn-out cassette player and a box of memories he hadn't touched in a decade. His breath steamed in the cold air as he rummaged through old tapes and CD cases, fingers trembling slightly as they landed on a cracked jewel case labeled Quinn and Harper, Live at Newport. He popped the tape into the player. It whirred, then clicked, then the music began grainy but unmistakable. Melina's voice soared through the speaker, clear, passionate, powerful. And then came the soft harmony, his voice, younger and more naive, weaving under hers like a lifeline. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the garage wall. He remembered the way she used to look at him on stage, like there was no one else in the world. The way she reached for his hand after every show, whispering, "It's always better when it's you and me." He remembered the sound of their last fight, how music had become the very thing that tore them apart. The industry wanted her solo. They said she didn't need the backup, said he was holding her back. He told her he didn't care what they said. But maybe he had cared. Maybe he hadn't fought hard enough. Maybe he hadn't listened when she said she was scared, not of failure, but of becoming invisible. And when she told him she was pregnant, he had been too stunned to say the one thing she needed to hear. "I want this. I want us." Instead, she left. And now here he was, listening to her voice bounce off garage walls, while her son, their son, slept 2 miles away dreaming of saving her with a song. The next morning, Raylan arrived at the hospital early. Carly was already there, brushing Benji's hair with quiet focus, while he ate a bowl of oatmeal. "Big day today," she said, glancing at Raylan. "What's today?" Raylan asked, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair. "Tryouts," Benji said, mouth full. Raylan raised an eyebrow. "Tryouts?" "For the local prelim. Top 3 move on to state." Benji grinned. "I signed up before everything." Raylan looked at Carly. "And you're okay with this?" She smiled. "Let's just say I'm learning how not to stand in the way of a miracle." The school auditorium looked different now, brighter. Benji stood at the edge of the stage, nervous but focused, while Raylan tuned the upright piano. Around them, other kids rehearsed, some with vocal coaches, others with YouTube videos on their phones. But none of them had what Benji had. Conviction. Raylan watched as Benji stepped forward when his name was called. The mic stand was a little too tall. He adjusted it with trembling hands. The judges barely looked up from their clipboards. Then Raylan struck the first chord. Benji's voice broke through the stillness like sunlight in a quiet chapel. It wasn't perfect. It wavered. It cracked in places. But it reached. It climbed. It bled. And by the time he reached the bridge, the entire auditorium was holding its breath. When the last note faded, no one clapped, not because they didn't care, but because they had forgotten how to move. Benji stepped back from the mic and looked toward Raylan, uncertain. Raylan gave him a small nod, eyes glistening. Then came the applause. Later that night, back at the RV, Raylan helped Carly clean up while Benji slept on the pull-out cot. "I never got to hear him sing like that before," she said softly. "He sings like someone who's been waiting his whole life to be heard," Raylan replied. She leaned against the counter, arms folded. "He didn't get that from me." Raylan hesitated. "Maybe he got it from both of you." She looked at him, brow furrowed slightly. "You say that like you know something I don't." Raylan paused. This was the moment. He could tell her now. The truth. But something in her eyes stopped him. Not fear. Not suspicion. Hope. And he couldn't bear to be wrong. Not yet. Back home, Raylan opened his notebook for the first time in years. Not to write music, but to write a letter. "Melina, there's a boy named Benji. He sings like you, looks like you, dreams like we used to. And when I hear him, I don't just hear a second chance. I hear a song we never finished. If you're still out there, maybe it's time we listen." Raylan, he didn't know where to send it yet, but somehow he knew the music would find its way. The next rehearsal was a disaster. It started with the wrong key. Then the pedal stuck. Then the left speaker gave out. By the time Benji hit the chorus, the feedback from the amp whined like a wounded animal, and the microphone snapped halfway down the stand. It clattered to the floor with a thud that felt louder than the song itself. Benji stood frozen on stage fists, clenched cheeks, flushed red with shame. Raylan moved quickly, muting the soundboard and walking up to the edge of the stage. "Take 5, he called, trying to keep his voice calm. The auditorium was empty, but for a janitor sweeping in the back and a faculty volunteer on her phone. Benji didn't move. Raylan climbed the steps. "Hey, I can't do this," Benji whispered. "You can," Raylan said. Benji shook his head. "Everything's broken." Raylan glanced at the crooked mic stand, the tangled cords, the cracked piano bench. "Yeah," he said. "It is!" Benji blinked up at him. "Then how let me show you something?" They drove in silence for 20 minutes. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the back roads of Jefferson County. Raylan turned down a gravel lane that led to a small wooden church. Its paint chipped its bell tower, leaning slightly to the left. He parked beside the building and gestured for Benji to follow. They entered through the side door, and the smell of old wood and hymnals filled the air. Inside, the pews were dusty. Light poured through stained glass windows in muted blues and greens. At the front of the sanctuary sat a worn, upright piano, scratched and faded, its keys yellowed with time. Raylan lifted the lid. "This," he said, "was the first piano I ever played. My dad was the pastor here. Every Saturday I'd sneak in and play before service. I broke the G-sharp key when I was 10. Still broken." He pressed it now. It stuck, halfway thudding instead of singing. Benji sat beside him, cautious. "You want to know a secret?" Raylan asked. Benji nodded. "This piano," Raylan said, "isn't perfect. Never was. But it taught me something. What, that you don't need perfect keys to make a song worth playing. You just need a reason to play it." Benji looked down at the keys. He placed his fingers on them tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. A simple scale, then a chord, then another. Raylan began to hum. Benji followed, and in that tiny crooked church something beautiful was born. Not flawless, not polished, but real. Honest. Heartfelt. Back at the hospital, Carly waited in the lobby with 2 steaming cups of cocoa. She smiled as they walked in, cheeks flushed from the cold. "How'd it go?" she asked. Benji grinned. "We broke a few things." Raylan chuckled and played around them. That night, Raylan sat on the hospital rooftop, bundled in his coat, a thermos of coffee in his hands. The stars above were unusually clear. It reminded him of the tours he used to take, long drives between cities, sitting on top of vans, with Melina naming constellations they'd never remember. He pulled a notebook from his coat pocket and flipped to a clean page. With careful strokes, he began to write chords in the margin, then lyrics, bits of phrases Benji had sung, lines from Carly's whispers, even words he hadn't said out loud since Melina left. It was a song in pieces, a story unfinished, but now finally it was beginning to hum again. The next morning, Benji surprised Raylan by arriving early to rehearsal with a guitar. "Where'd you get that?" Raylan asked, eyeing the old 6-string slung over Benji's shoulder. "My mom used to teach lessons before she got sick," Benji said, adjusting the strap. "She gave me this when I turned 9. You play a little." Benji sat down and started to strum a slow, uncertain rhythm that picked up strength with each pass. Raylan joined in on piano, his left hand playing chords, his right hand filling in melody lines like he'd never stopped. It wasn't the original arrangement. wasn't the key they'd practiced. But it worked. More than that, it sang. As the last chord faded, Raylan looked at Benji with something close to awe. "You changed it." Benji shrugged. "You said I had to make it my own." Raylan nodded slowly. "You did. And it's better." That afternoon, Carly entered the auditorium with a small bag of cough drops and a folded blanket. She paused when she saw Raylan alone on stage, playing the same new version of the song, Benji's version. She waited until the last note rang before speaking. "You're teaching him more than just music," she said softly. Raylan turned. "He's teaching me too." She walked down the aisle, sat in the front row. Her eyes were tired but kind. "I used to think we had to wait until life was perfect before we sang the big songs." Raylan gave her a half smile. "Turns out the big songs are the ones we sing because life isn't." She looked up at him, and for a moment the air shifted. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was something stronger: recognition. Two people who had each lost the music once and were now daring to let it return. That night, Benji fell asleep humming. Raylan stood at the door of his room watching. He didn't say anything, just listened. To the boy, to the room, to the small, imperfect melody floating through the air like a fragile prayer. And in the quiet, Raylan smiled, because it didn't matter how broken the keys were anymore. What mattered was that the heart kept beating. The rain came without warning. One moment the sky was a pale winter blue, and the next, clouds rolled in heavy with memory. Raylan stood in his kitchen, coffee cooling on the counter, staring out the window. Drops tapped gently against the pane like fingers asking to be let in. He had meant to clean the garage that day. Instead, he opened the old chest in the corner, the one that hadn't been touched since Melina left. Inside, among yellowed sheet music and broken guitar strings, lay a small cedar box. He hadn't seen it in years. The latch was rusted, but it opened with a creak that sounded like time. Sighing. Inside on top lay a photograph. Melina, younger, barefoot, standing by the river with a wide straw hat, and that look the one that saw right through him. But it wasn't her that made Raylan sit down hard on the garage floor. It was the child in her arms, the little boy. No more than a year old. Dark hair, big eyes. A laugh frozen in motion as he reached toward the camera. There, scribbled in Melina's familiar handwriting on the back, "Benji Summer, 14, we made music before he even spoke." Raylan didn't breathe for a moment. Then, slowly, reverently, he turned the photo over again. He'd known. Somewhere deep down, he'd known. That evening rehearsal was quieter than usual. Benji strummed absently on his guitar foot, tapping against the leg of the stool. Carly had gone to pick up prescriptions, and the auditorium felt larger without her soft presence. Raylan walked in slowly, the photograph still tucked into his coat pocket. Benji looked up. "You okay?" Raylan nodded. "Just tired?" But it was more than that. There was a weight in his chest that no melody could dissolve. "Can I ask you something?" Raylan said as he sat down beside the boy. Benji shrugged. "Sure. Do you remember anything? From when you were little?" "Like, really little." Benji furrowed his brow. "Not much. Just Mom singing in the mornings. She used to dance around the kitchen when the radio was on." Raylan smiled faintly. "Did she ever talk about your dad?" Benji hesitated. Just that he loved music. That he left because life got too loud. Raylan's throat tightened. "Why are you asking?" Benji asked quietly. Raylan reached into his coat and held out the photo. Benji took it, turning it slowly in his hands. "That's me," he said, recognition flickering across his face. "And Mom." He flipped it over. When he read the back, his eyes lifted. "You knew her." Raylan met his gaze. More than that. Benji stared. Are you saying? Raylan swallowed. I'm saying I didn't know back then. And I'm sorry. But I think no. I know I'm your father. Silence. Long. Stretched. So full of meaning it trembled. Then Benji stood clutching the photo. Why didn't she tell you? Raylan shook his head. I don't know. Maybe she thought I wasn't ready. Maybe I wasn't. Benji turned the photo over in his hands again. Did you want a son? Raylan's voice cracked. More than anything. Benji didn't say anything. But after a long moment, he stepped forward, wrapped his arms around Raylan and whispered, Then maybe. We can finish the song now. Carly returned later that night to find the two of them asleep on the worn stage rug, Benji curled into Raylan's side. Raylan's hand resting protectively over the boy's shoulder. She stood in the doorway, tears welling quietly. Then she looked down into her purse. The prescription bag crinkled as she shifted it. On top of it was an envelope. From Melina. Sent weeks ago. She had found Carly's address after all. Carly unfolded the note slowly. Carly, if Benji is with Raylan, and if you see him smile again, please tell him the truth. He deserves it. They both do. And thank you for keeping the music alive while I ran from it. Melina Carly pressed the note to her heart. Then she walked into the room, knelt beside Raylan and whispered. She knew. The next day, Raylan didn't say much. Neither did Benji. But they practiced like the world was listening. And this time, Raylan didn't just play chords. He played memories, forgiveness, a father's prayer. Benji didn't just sing. He offered his heart. And somewhere inside the song, beneath every trembling note, every breath that carried something too big for words, they stitched the broken seams of 11 lost years. Together, the auditorium sat in silence, like a breath being held. Only the faint hum of the lights and the low tapping of Raylan's foot on the wooden stage broke the stillness. He sat at the piano, head down, fingers motionless over the keys. Benji stood beside him, clutching his guitar, the neck worn smooth by practice. He looked up at the rows of empty seats, the looming curtain, the mic that stood center stage like a challenge. Do you think I'm ready? He asked. Raylan didn't answer immediately. You're ready, he said at last. But being ready doesn't mean you won't be scared. It just means you'll sing anyway. Benji nodded, though the tremble in his fingers betrayed him. Tomorrow was the state finals. And it wasn't just a song anymore. It was his mother's surgery, his father's return, his entire world. Earlier that morning, the phone rang in the middle of breakfast. Carly answered, her face pale as she listened. When she hung up, she sat down across from Raylan, and Benji's hands shaking slightly. They moved up the surgery, she said softly. The doctors say it can't wait any longer. They'll operate the morning after the show. Benji's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. But we won't have the prize money yet, I know, Carly said. They're doing it anyway. As a favor, because of how many people called and wrote letters after your story aired last week. Benji looked at Raylan. Was that you? Raylan shook his head. It wasn't just me. The truth was the town had rallied. Word had spread first through social media, then local news. A boy trying to save his mom with a song. A single dad helping him find his voice. A family that didn't even know it had found each other. People had shown up with envelopes of cash, gift cards, anonymous notes. A retired choir teacher dropped off a box of throat lozenges and said, I believe in that boy. Raylan had watched it all unfold with a mixture of awe and humility. The world, when it wanted to be, could still be good. That afternoon, Benji had one final rehearsal. Not on stage, not in front of judges or spotlights, but in the courtyard behind the hospital. He stood on the old brick path, guitar strapped on, while Carly sat in a wheelchair nearby, a blanket over her lap. Nurses watched from a distance. Even a few patients opened their windows to listen. Raylan sat beside him with a small amp and his acoustic guitar. "Ready?" he asked. Benji nodded. His voice was steady now. He sang not to win, but to tell a story, to say thank you, to say goodbye to fear. The song wasn't loud. It was gentle, real. Raylan harmonized softly, the two guitars twining like old friends, rediscovering each other after a long silence. When it ended, Carly was crying. She wasn't alone. That night, the nerves returned. Benji lay awake on the pull-out cot in the RV, staring at the ceiling. Raylan sat nearby, nursing a cup of herbal tea. "I don't know if I can sleep," Benji whispered. "You don't have to," Raylan said. "Just rest." Benji sat up. "What if I mess up tomorrow?" Raylan met his eyes. "Then we mess up together. But what if I forget the words? Then we find our way back." Benji hesitated. "What if I'm not good enough?" Raylan leaned forward. "You already are." Benji's eyes welled. "Even if I don't win," Raylan smiled. "Especially then." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Benji crawled over and curled into Raylan's side. Raylan rested a hand on the boy's back. "I don't know if I ever believed in second chances," he said quietly. "But somehow, you gave me one." Benji's voice was muffled in his shirt. "You gave me one too." The next morning, the sun rose behind heavy clouds, the kind that threatened rain but never quite delivered. The air buzzed with quiet tension. Raylan packed up the instruments. Benji tuned his guitar one last time. Carly stood at the RV door, bundled in a coat, eyes proud and tired. She kissed Benji's forehead. "No matter what happens out there," she whispered, "you already won." Benji hugged her tight, then looked up at Raylan. "Let's go finish the song." Raylan nodded, and together they stepped into the day they had been walking toward for a lifetime. The theater was older than most remembered. Built in the late 1940s, it carried the scent of varnish velvet and old applause. Its red seats had faded to burgundy, and the backstage curtain bore the ghosts of 1,000 nervous hands. Raylan stood in the wings, watching Benji fidget with his guitar strap. "You okay?" he asked. Benji nodded too quickly. "I think so." Raylan crouched beside him, adjusting the strap gently. "This isn't about perfect notes." Benji looked up. "What's it about?" Raylan smiled. "It's about making people feel something they forgot they were allowed to feel." Benji nodded slower this time. They both turned as the announcer's voice echoed through the loudspeakers. "Next up, contestant number 14, Benji Wallace." A polite round of applause rose from the audience. Raylan stood and squeezed Benji's shoulder. "I'll be right behind you." Benji took a breath, then stepped into the lights. From the first moment, the stage betrayed them. The spotlight flickered. The mic wobbled on its stand. The soundboard popped faintly in the back. But Benji didn't flinch. He planted his feet, adjusted the mic himself, turned slightly toward Raylan, who was already seated at the old upright piano waiting. Raylan's fingers found the opening chords, soft, steady, familiar. And then Benji sang. It wasn't perfect. His voice cracked on the second line. A string buzzed during a chord shift, but none of that mattered. Because when Benji sang, the room listened, leaned in, heart slowed, breathing stopped. It wasn't a performance, it was a confession. From a boy who had carried too much, from a father who had let go of too much. Together, their music didn't entertain, it healed. As the song built, Raylan layered in soft harmonies beneath Benji's lead, his voice older, deeper, worn in all the right ways. Their duet rose like a tide, two parts of a story finally told at the same time. By the final verse, you could feel the air thicken with emotion. In the front row, Melina Harper sat, stone still. The other judges stole glances at her. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her breathing was shallow. She had no doubt anymore. That was Raylan at the piano, and that was her son standing beside him. Tears fell freely, but she didn't look away. Not once. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was heavy sacred. Then an eruption. The audience stood, hands clapping, voices cheering. But neither Benji nor Raylan moved. They just looked at each other, exhausted, stunned, and whole. Backstage, as the curtain closed behind them, Benji collapsed into Raylan's arms. I didn't forget the words he whispered. Raylan laughed softly, holding him close. You didn't forget anything. 10 minutes later, while other contestants posed for photos and shook hands, Melina stepped behind the curtain. She looked smaller than Raylan remembered, but the same. Her hair was shorter, her eyes wiser. She paused when she saw him. He rose to meet her. Neither spoke at first. Then she said softly, I should have told you. Raylan shook his head. We both should have. Melina looked at Benji, who was sitting on a folding chair, guitar still in his lap. He's everything we could have been, she said. Raylan's voice broke. He's more. Benji looked up. He had seen her on stage in photographs, even on a CD cover once. But now she was right there, real raw, crying. Hi, he said. Melina knelt in front of him. Hi, sweetheart. He blinked. You're the judge. She smiled through tears. No, I'm just your mother. Benji looked at Raylan, then back to her. I think we wrote something beautiful today, he said. She nodded, placing a hand on his cheek. You did. All of you. The awards didn't matter. Not really. But when Benji's name was called as the winner of the state talent competition and the theater erupted once again, he stood frozen for a moment, before walking out, Raylan and Melina beside him. And for once, the spotlight didn't flicker. That night, in the quiet of the hospital waiting room, Raylan, Melina, and Benji sat side by side as Carly's surgery began. They didn't talk much, just held hands, and waited. The music for now was silent, but in their hearts, it played on. Melina hadn't cried in years. She had taught herself how to press the grief down until it settled like dust in the corners of her soul. That was how she'd survived the years after Raylan, the music industry, the long nights with no one to sing to, the guilt of sending a child into the world with only half a truth. But now, in this small hospital room, beside a boy who bore her eyes and his father's heart, the tears came like rain after drought. She sat by Benji's bed as he dozed, guitar by his side, fingers still curled in the shape of a C chord. The quiet was deep, but her thoughts were louder than ever. Across the room, Raylan leaned against the window, arms folded, watching the night. The surgery lights still glowed down the hall where Carly lay in the hands of strangers and prayers. Melina turned to him. You stayed with him. Raylan looked back. He stayed with me. She nodded slowly. I always thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel what I left behind. And did it work? She gave a brittle smile, only until he opened his mouth and sang. Raylan crossed the room, sat in the chair beside her. There was no tension now, only years between them, and something else. Peace. I wrote letters, she whispered. So many. I never sent them. I thought maybe, if he grew up not knowing, he wouldn't miss what he never had. Raylan's voice was quiet. He missed it anyway. Melina nodded, biting her lip. So did I. They sat in silence. Then Melina reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Worn. Soft from being opened and refolded 100 times. She handed it to him. It was a copy of an old song. Their song. Do you remember this? She asked. Raylan ran his fingers over the page. I remember the night we wrote it. You were barefoot. It was raining. You said we'd finish it when we were ready. He looked at her. I think we are. Down the hall, the surgery light turned off. A nurse appeared a few moments later. "She's stable," she said. "She's going to be okay." Benji stirred, blinking awake. Mom Melina touched his hand gently. "She made it, sweetheart." Benji smiled so wide it broke something inside her. Raylan stood and crossed the room. He placed a hand on Benji's shoulder, then on Melina's. "I think we all made it," he said. Later that night, after visiting hours had ended, Melina lingered in the hallway with Raylan. "I don't want to miss another decade," she said softly. Raylan studied her. "You won't. Not if we stop trying to rewrite the past and just sing what's here now." She smiled. "Are you saying you're still willing to sing with me?" He met her eyes. "Only every day." And just like that, the second tear fell. This one, not from grief, but from the grace of being forgiven and letting herself receive it. The next morning, the sun broke through for the first time in a week. Carly sat propped up in bed, a little pale, but smiling as Benji played a soft tune beside her. Raylan and Melina stood at the door, hand in hand, listening. I never thought, Melina whispered, that the boy I once carried would be the one to carry me. Raylan squeezed her hand. That's what miracles look like. In the corner of the room, a nurse snapped a picture. Benji looking up at Carly, both smiling. Raylan's arm around Melina, a song still floating in the air. She would frame that photo one day. But for now, she just held it in her heart. Because sometimes, the greatest melodies aren't the ones that win awards. They're the ones that bring the lost home again. The check sat unopened on the kitchen table. $25,000 made out to Benji Wallace State Talent Show Grand Champion. It lay there like something too sacred to touch. Carly sat at the kitchen counter, still pale from recovery, her tea growing cold in her hands. Across from her, Benji ran his fingers along the edge of the envelope, but didn't open it. He had read his mother's face when the surgeon walked in, when they said successful, when the monitors beeped steady. That was the real prize. Not money, not applause. Her heartbeat, still here, still strong. Raylan stood in the doorway watching them both. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. Not the smile of a man who'd just helped win a state competition, but of a man who'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. A reason to stay. He stepped into the room and ruffled Benji's hair. "How's it feel being famous?" Benji made a face. "Weird. You'll get used to it." "I don't want to get used to it," the boy said. "I just want to sing." For her. Carly reached across the table and took his hand. "You already have, sweetheart." Every note. Later that day, the mayor's office called. A small ceremony, photos, local press. Raylan expected Benji to jump at the chance, but the boy hesitated. "Can we wait?" "Wait for what?" Raylan asked gently. Benji looked up. To sing again. But not just for a stage. Raylan understood. The song wasn't finished. Not yet. They spent the next week quietly. No interviews. No media. No calls from agents. Just music. Simple and unrehearsed. Raylan brought his guitar to the hospital. Carly hummed harmonies from her bed. Melina stayed longer each day, her voice returning not in performance, but in lullabies and laughter. Each morning, Benji played the same song on his guitar, his version. Changed slightly now. Slower. Softer. He added new lines. "I thought I sang to save you. But the truth is clearer now. You saved me too. Somehow." Raylan listened from the hallway the first time he heard it. The words wrapped around his ribs, squeezing gently. They weren't polished lyrics, but they were true. And in the world Raylan now believed in, truth was worth more than perfection. A few days later, they returned to the church. The same broken church where Raylan had first shown Benji the piano with the stuck G-sharp key. This time they came together, Raylan, Benji, Carly. In her coat and scarf, Melina at her side. They didn't plan to perform, just to remember. Benji walked down the aisle and sat at the piano, running his fingers across the keys with familiarity. The note still stuck, but he smiled. "I think it's my favorite one now," he said. "Why?" Melina asked from a nearby pew. "Because it taught me the most," he replied. "That sometimes the broken part is the one people remember." Raylan sat beside him and began to play. No microphones, no lights. Benji sang. And this time, when he reached the final note, Carly joined in. Soft, tentative, but full of love. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about what had already been won. That night, they gathered on the back porch of the RV. Carly curled under a blanket, Melina beside her, and Raylan tuning a worn-out guitar with one eye closed. Benji stood with a notebook in hand. "I wrote something," he said. "Is it a song?" Raylan asked. Benji grinned. "Sort of." He cleared his throat. "This is for anyone who ever thought their voice didn't matter. For kids who don't have shiny microphones or perfect chords. For parents who lost their rhythm and found it again in small hands. For the stage that cracked but still stood. For the song that kept going even when no one was listening. This is for you. This is for us. And the prize was never the money." Silence followed. Then Carly clapped once slowly. Melina wiped her eyes. Raylan gave a soft whistle. "You just outwrote half the Billboard charts," he said. Benji shrugged. "Maybe. But I just wrote what I felt." Raylan looked at him, proud and quiet. "That he said is what music's for." The next morning, Raylan found the check still on the table. He picked it up, then walked out to where Benji was practicing chords. He held it out. "You sure you don't want to cash this in for something flashy? A new guitar, big city studio time." Benji strummed a G chord. "I already got what I wanted," he said. "And it wasn't for me." Raylan looked at him, eyes narrowing playfully. "You're gonna be trouble when you grow up." Benji grinned. "I already am." They laughed, two voices that had once been strangers, now in perfect harmony. Winter gave way to spring without fanfare. Snow melted from the church roof, revealing the worn shingles underneath. Crocuses pushed up through cracks in the sidewalk. The mornings carried the scent of damp earth and possibility. Inside the old sanctuary, the upright piano still sat in its place, dustless, now its G-sharp key still stubborn, still imperfect. Raylan sat beside it, eyes closed, fingers resting lightly on the keys. He wasn't rehearsing anymore. He was remembering every note he'd played beside Benji, every harmony shared, every chord that had come, not from practice, but from the quiet, knowing that this time it meant something. Behind him, the sound of footsteps. Benji entered, guitar in hand, followed by Carly, steady on her feet again, and Melina with her arm gently looped through Raylan's. No one said much. They didn't have to. It had been 2 months since the competition, since the check, since the surgery. Carly had recovered slowly but steadily. Each breath came easier. Her voice, once soft from illness, now rang clear again, sometimes humming along to the radio, sometimes joining Benji in evening porch songs. Melina had stayed, not as a visitor, not as a shadow from the past, but as a quiet, constant presence. She didn't talk much about the missing years. Neither did Raylan. Some stories didn't need retelling. They just needed a new beginning. That morning, they'd been invited to a local nursing home. An old friend of Carly's had requested a song. Benji had agreed immediately. They were kids once, he said. They remember music, even if they don't remember anything else. So they came. Raylan brought the guitar. Benji carried his lyrics. Carly brought cookies in a tin still warm. Melina carried nothing but herself, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. They played in the community room under low ceilings and yellow light. The residents sat in a loose semicircle. Some nodded off. Others clapped before the song even began. One woman clutched a stuffed rabbit like a child. Benji stood in front of them, cleared his throat, and began to sing. He sang the same song, but it had grown. New verses, deeper tone, a richness that hadn't been there the first time he sang it. Raylan played beside him, matching each breath, every tempo change. Melina joined on the final chorus, her harmony soft, but sure. You taught me how to listen when the world forgot to speak. You gave me something steady when my hands were feeling weak. I carried every silence, like a weight I couldn't name, till your song became the reason that the world looked bright again. By the end, even the woman with the stuffed rabbit was smiling. One man in a wheelchair raised his hand and whispered, "I danced to that." Once. Raylan nodded, eyes glassy. Me too. After the performance, they stayed to visit. Benji sat beside a veteran who once played trumpet in a marching band. Carly passed out cookies to anyone who would take them. Melina knelt to speak with a woman who had been a music teacher in another life. Raylan sat quietly tuning the guitar with calm hands. A nurse leaned over and whispered to him, "You gave them more than music today." He looked at her. "You gave them back their memories." Raylan swallowed. "No," he said gently. "That was the boy. I just played along." That night, they gathered on the porch again. The stars were out, clear, sharp, brilliant. Benji looked up at the sky, his guitar across his lap. "Do you think songs can live forever?" Raylan leaned back in his chair. "Some of them." "What makes a song stay?" Carly answered from beside him. "It's not the melody," Melina added. "It's not the words either." Raylan smiled. "It's what it came from," he said. "If it came from love, from truth, from someone refusing to give up, then it'll stay. Long after we're gone." Benji nodded slowly. Then he strummed a quiet chord. And they sang together, not for a stage, not for a prize, not even for each other. They sang because something inside them still needed to speak, still needed to heal, still needed to live. In the distance, the wind stirred. A broken stage, long empty, echoed softly with the sound of something remembered. And somewhere in the silence that followed, the song stayed. And maybe that's how the most lasting songs are written, not on paper, but in the quiet places between people who choose to stay, forgive, and begin again. We'd love to hear where you're watching from today. Whether you're curled up with a blanket in Montana or sipping coffee down in Georgia, your presence means the world to us. And if this story touched something in you, we invite you gently to subscribe. Not just for more stories, but for more moments that remind us we're not alone. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. It's not just your views, it's your heart that keeps this little corner of the internet alive with warmth and hope. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and never stop listening for the music that stays.